Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the Professor Greg Dooley and the pundit Steve Clark. Men, take the mic.
That's right, it's the Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark, and we are proudly presented by Nick Hopwood, who's a certified financial planner, founder, and president of Peak Wealth Management. Retire with confidence. Greg, we're about a week and a half away from Michigan football, and what's the mood index like that you've been seeing and releasing over the summer?
So I put out my preliminary mood index, and the whole idea was to kind of gauge, in a silly way, the collective mood of the fan base. Like, how do they feel about the team throughout the season, right? And obviously, it's been very, very high the last couple of years. And I have the whole chart on invictors.com, and I think, Steve, we're going to come in around a 95 or 96, which is the highest the mood has ever started a season.
Why not higher?
It goes to 100, and that's kind of defined as Nirvana as the national championship.
Okay. This is not just Big Ten. This includes being a national championship feeling.
This is how you feel okay, so why not higher? Do you feel right now the same way you felt after we beat Ohio State last year or the year before? Is that your mood right now? It's not just solely the prospect of the team. It's a feeling. It's your emotional state. Yes, we have a very good feeling. We're all excited for football, and we're excited about this football team. But it doesn't compare to the feeling the days after we beat Ohio State and knocked them really on their butts.
Still a little TCU hangover then?
No, it's really hard to say the mood is through the ceiling and to suggest that we're at 99 or we're at 100 and we're the best. No, I think it's definitely lower than that. It's a little lower than that. Again, this is a silly measure.
No, it's not. I think it's very interesting.
It's not, are we the number one team or number two in the land, therefore we're 99 or 100. It's not that.
Okay.
It's the emotional state of fandom, okay? During COVID, absolute rock bottom. The index only goes to 40. Below that is what I call the sad trough of disillusionment, right? Where you don't care. And what you thought isn't. And what you felt isn't there anymore. And are we playing Saturday? Can this season just get over? We went from that almost instantly to jump up as we won those games 2 years ago to being in the Big Ten title race. And it hasn't moved back since.
Turnarounds don't happen all that often. And, I mean, there are a few of them. I mean, each school can have its peaks and valleys. But this was getting to the point after COVID, talking about a coach that might get fired. And now you are back-to-back Big Ten champs, beating Ohio State 2 years in a row. I mean, it just seems sort of unfathomable at the time, considering the streak that Ohio State and Michigan went on since 2001.
Since I've been doing this, there's nothing really to compare it to. The closest thing as far as the instant turnaround was when Harbaugh was hired. We went from a shambles to, we've got our dream coach.
Yeah,
and
you didn't make a bowl, and you went for Brady Hoke, getting the coach that you wanted and you didn't think you could get.
Yeah, but we've seen probably most of the fan base. Would you agree, Steve, thought it's probably time to move on from Jim Harbaugh? This didn't work. It's too bad.
You could tell the mood index was starting to feel that way.
Well, I feel like people felt like if he moves on or we make a change, I'm okay with it. At a minimum, I'd argue, while there's a lot of revisionist history, I was always with him.
Right.
He was always my guy. I think in reality, during those dark times, I think most people were ready to move on from Harbaugh.
At the time, I was going if Harbaugh doesn't work, what now? Where else are you going to go? What big name is going to want to come here? How much money are we going to dole out? It kind of felt like if Harbaugh wasn't going to work, it seemed like there's not much hope beyond that. And
maybe football's passed Michigan by.
Or something. Michigan's turning into Minnesota. I mean, I had thought those things. Minnesota, by the way, been talked about over the last few weeks as the last team to three-peat. Georgia is going to attempt to do that. So people start going, hey, when's the last time somebody three-peated in the modern era? Well, nobody's three-peated in the modern era. You have to go all the way back to Minnesota in the Great Depression.
I'm still stuck on maybe we turned into Minnesota, which brings up the great line from Soundgarden that looking California but feeling Minnesota, which is what Michigan would have been. We would have this great brand. We'd have looked California with the Block M, but if the fan base would have felt Minnesota. So that's great. Yeah. Hey, where I was at was, okay, if not Harbaugh, then who? Which is very similar to what you're saying, Steve, right? It's like, well, who are we bringing in other than our native son, All-American quarterback who's been in the Super Bowl? Like, who's this special guy? Oh, the cat from Iowa State that no one's talking about anymore. Oh, he's a genius.
Matt Williams.
Yeah, he's brilliant, and bring him in. Well, his stock is down a little bit now.
Oh, no. Yeah, I mean, last year Iowa State lost like 7 or 8 games by 1 score or less, which some suggest there might be a little bit of a turnaround. The problem is they barely won any games last year.
But I think everyone now, when they're looking at moving on from Harbaugh, whether that's to the NFL or whatever, I think the default answer is one of the people that's on the staff right now, Sharon Moore, right? One of those guys on the staff. So there does seem to be, in all respects, we seem to be in a better place from a program standpoint. We're not Minnesota. We're not turning into Minnesota, Steve.
When you're on top in the Big Ten, you have the pick of the litter, and you could probably pay him. And also, you got people on the staff that brought this up, because this is not totally Jim Harbaugh. This is offensive and defensive coordinators and people behind the scenes. And it's the players themselves that are putting in the commitment and being together. And somehow Michigan found a way, and I put some of this on Cade McNamara and others around him. They had to find people that weren't going to lose in the clutch. And I think that was different. Michigan always had some wins in the clutch, but not against big teams or in the big moment. The things that get documentaries made after you if you win.
Right.
And Michigan was failing in those instances and sometimes really crashed, 2018, 2019 football games against Ohio State. But now you've got players on this team that believe. And it's kind of funny how in 2 short years, it's Michigan dominating the Big Ten. Does Ohio State have Michigan in their head, and can they get it back? And Ohio State's turning to alumni who used to win against Michigan all the time and brought them in as coaches. James Laurinaitis in the linebacking spot, the offensive coordinator, Brian Hardline. I mean, these are little moves that Ohio State's been doing to try to build a foundation back, because you have to wonder the way Ohio State's lost the last couple of years, that they're kind of perplexed and puzzled and don't know what to do. And I like that situation better than what Michigan has been through the last 15 years prior to that.
I think a lot of people like it better, including I was at the MDen yesterday, and Nick Baumgartner and Mark Snyder have a book on the 97 team, which I got a sneak preview. Maybe we'll have those guys on the pod here to talk about it. Great book, by the way. I'll put a link in the show notes. But they were doing a book signing at the MDen, and I had a chance to talk to Scott Hurth, who's the owner of the MDen, right? And I always ask everyone how's business. And usually you pick up some insight like, oh, my supplier prices. And Scott Hurth, one of the things he said was, well, my logistical issues have been cleared out because there were all those issues during COVID with getting product. But obviously business is really good for the MDen, and it's always a correlation with winning. In fact, one of the lines in the 97 book is from Scott Hurth, and the sales of the national championship and the Rose Bowl gear, they said they made 2 years of sales from a month and a half, a few months of national championship stuff. And they're seeing that now, less so with the playoff stuff, of course, because we lost. Perhaps we win the national championship. It's a game changer. But the Big Ten championship back-to-back stuff, they can't make enough of. And fans love it. And fans, when there's studies done on this, when your team wins, you like to wear your Michigan gear around. They studied it at Wisconsin one year. Some group came in and studied it, and it's a fact. You associate with the win, right?
Well, and then people locally, too. I certainly got sick and tired of watching all of the Ohio State jersey-wearing, T-shirt-wearing people.
Mostly jersey wearing.
But you found
that's their game, man.
You found a
Cats and Boyer.
lot of people locally in Ann Arbor and in the surrounding communities all wearing their Ohio State or Michigan State gear when Michigan was lane. Not seeing it. Happy not to see it, but I was certainly getting sick and tired of seeing it.
Yeah.
Speaking of Ohio State, they're now the hunter instead of the hunted. Previewing him for WTK this week. All of the other national championship contenders, except for Michigan, Ohio State's looking for a quarterback. And I don't think they're choosing between the next Justin Fields and the next C.J. Stroud, or maybe the next Tanner Mordecai or the next Hudson Card. It's a little bit more desperate than that.
And Georgia needs a new quarterback, which when we kind of elevate
right.
and talk about where Michigan fits in, it's why some people, Reese Davis, it's why some people think Michigan's got a great shot to win the national championship.
And let's not forget Alabama. Alabama's looking for a new quarterback. Yep. A former Notre Dame quarterback might be the starter there, and is led by a young offensive coordinator who used to play quarterback at Notre Dame in years where Notre Dame wasn't exactly that good, making people ask, is Alabama on their way to decline after having 2 solid decades of absolutely being on top?
Tough to see that, and also tough to see Ohio State not having an effective college quarterback is really tough to see. It's kind of burned in my brain.
It's crazy. Now, whoever the quarterback is going to be at Ohio State is going to have a multitude of weapons on the field, most notably in the receiving position where that isn't dying down. But they're also got 2 solid running backs who played hurt last year, and if both of them were healthy, would have Michigan just won that 1 year in Ann Arbor? And I don't know. I mean, that's a lot for Ohio State people to wake up in the middle of the night dreaming about. But that's not my problem.
Yeah, it's not our problem.
Nope.
We have 2 really good running backs as well. So does Penn State. And I heard you guys talking about this. But we beat Ohio State not only with 1 down, we had one who had 1 functioning hand in the game who can really catch the ball normally in Donovan Edwards. So knock on wood, we have 2 going into this game, and namely Blake Corum and a healthy Donovan Edwards.
The Big Ten is absolutely stacked at running backs this year. Not so at quarterbacks. And J.J. McCarthy is going to lead the charge along with Maryland's quarterback, Taulia Tagovailoa, to be the 2 premier quarterbacks in the Big Ten. Tanner Mordecai's fans certainly think he could do something at Wisconsin, having coming from an electric offense at SMU. I was just glad that they're above the ground in terms of an offense with Cade McNamara at quarterback and 2 quality tight ends.
He's a big upgrade for them, though.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
And I have so much respect for Cade. Again, I wish it was a little less bumpy when he left. Either quiet or a little more grateful about what happened. I'm grateful for what he did here, but I'm looking forward to watching him. I'm looking forward to seeing how he does with Iowa. I'm sure you'll be watching him, Steve, in the Clark household.
Yeah, that's because my wife graduated, got her master's degree out there, and she was born and raised in Iowa, so of course that's always a big thing. But yeah, their offense will be a little bit above zero. Their offensive line may be a little bit better, but they got their 2 tight ends back. It's a tight end offense.
Yeah,
and they got 2
Eric
of them.
Gall. Yeah, and then who's the other guy?
The other guy might be the true starting tight end, Luke Lachey. His dad, by the way, Jim Lachey, former Ohio State Buckeye, played in the NFL for a long time, and is now on the broadcasting team for the Buckeyes radio network.
Okay, yeah, he's good. That guy's good.
Yeah, Jake Butt posted on X ranking his top 5 tight ends, and both Iowa guys were on the list.
So, okay, and then, I assume Loveland was in there somewhere.
Yeah, Colson Loveland's in the top 5, but Jake Butt's profile is rising. I think he's going to be a star.
He does a good job. I've heard him on Channel 84 on Sirius. He does a really good job breaking it down. He's obviously a pro-Michigan guy, but I think he's fair, and he's
that's not our problem that he's a pro-Michigan guy. We're just happy about that.
That's right. That's right.
Keep those Michigan people in the media.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. There was some NIL news, Steve. I don't know if we want to get to that.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah, so a couple things. First of all, the athletic department and the football team announced a partnership with and effectively an endorsement of Champion Circle. Okay, and Champion Circle is Jared Wangler, former football player, son of the great Johnny Wangler, right, from the 70s and early 80s. And he runs both Champion Circle, which is a NIL collective, and also Valiant Management, which serves more like a sports agency, right? Forget about the 2 distinctions, but the athletic department basically endorsed champion circle as right now the official or the collective of choice for fans to support, donate. If you want to get involved with NIL, they're basically saying, go here. And that in and of itself is a big deal. The second part of the package, though, is they agreed to a partnership with Learfield, and Learfield owns the rights to market and use the Block M and advertise on it. Okay, so what that means now, what is the significance of this? It means that the athletes can do, if they want, they can do endorsements in the stadium. They can be wearing their jerseys and speak on behalf of their position as Michigan football players and things and use the logos. Okay, that's a big deal to advertisers. That's a big deal to fans. Now, why does this endorsement matter? I think why it matters, or why it could matter, is there's probably a lot of people confused. They see 6 different collectives, 7 different ways that they've heard maybe they can support the team. There's different affiliations with people. Now, what the athletic department, the football team, Jim Harbaugh, everyone's saying is go here. Okay, you want to help, you want to do it, go here. Now you've got our backing behind it, so there's some trust there. It's like having
an endorsement.
It's like having Tom Selleck, endorse your insurance company or something like that. It makes people feel good. Okay, it doesn't mean that Jamie Morris's stadium in Maine is going away. They're not. Okay, they're still there. They're still supporting athletes. You can still support them. But I think a lot of people are confused about this. The biggest issue with NIL with a lot of Michigan fans, I think, remains this, though, Steve. Like, number one, we heard about the $7 billion TV contract, okay? And we know you have the deal with Jumpman and marketing, and you're getting all this money. You publish your budget. You're making over $210 million a year, right? And you want money from me to support NIL. Oh, well, how about my ticket money? Okay, and my donation money. Okay, well, you don't do that. Well, how about my Peacock subscription, which funds the TV contract? Okay, how about all the merch I bought? And how about the J.J. McCarthy jersey I bought at the M-Den? So I've gave already, okay? I gave at the office. That's how a lot of people feel about this. And why are you shaking me down I think is the hesitation. And by the way, here's the other thing. I'm not giving to the hospital where maybe it goes to research that could find a cure for something, or buy equipment that could be used for 20 years in the hospital, right? Or fund a doctor who's going to, partly fund a doctor for a long time, or put my name on the wall. No, I'm funding a few months of maybe a player who may be gone to the NFL or transfer, or God forbid, get hurt. It's fleeting.
So what happened to the Michigan money cannon?
Well, so Steve, are you ready to give after my little speech there?
Look, I'm not a part of the Michigan money cannon, but what happened to the Michigan money cannon where the amount of income was endless?
The Michigan money cannon. Okay, it's still there somewhere, Steve, and I do
nobody can find it.
I do think with this endorsement that maybe this will help some of the bigger donors who scratching a check for $1 million when you've given 500, Stephen Ross, maybe isn't so tough. That's changing the couch to some of these guys. As amazing, as that sounds, there is a feeling that we're still in this state of flux with NIL. We don't know where it's going, but we need a war chest to get us through to the other side of what this is. And that might be just a year or two. Right? Can you get us through? What does that mean? It means getting enough money to support things like the One More Year Fund, where, hey, you're eligible for the draft, but you're a mid-round pick. Hey, we've got some deals, endorsements, this kind of thing. We'll support you, and here's some money to incent you maybe to stick around.
I like that better than giving unproven 4 stars and 5 stars carte blanche to everything for a variety of reasons. But that's what other universities are doing to make sure that they're coming in the first place. And there's already some Michigan turnover in this great 2024 recruiting class that are flipping to schools that are going to pay them more money immediately.
Well, yeah, and I know this, and this isn't a Michigan thing, but I've talked to big donors at other schools, major donors, and they don't want it just to be them. And they're business people. They want kind of an ecosystem, right? Where what are we doing here as opposed to artificially inflating and funding this entity? There's real business out. JJ endorsing a yoga company has a real business thing. Selling jerseys for $120, players get 20. That's a real business opportunity. People snap up those jerseys. Dude, trading cards, which I didn't realize, Steve, are a big deal. Get this. I heard the Emden made 12,000 sets of cards last year that the players get a piece of because it has their name, or it has Michigan on it, and they sold them out, and they can't make them fast enough. So I think there's a business side to this. You mentioned recruiting, so you can't incent a player to come to Michigan and here's money if you come here, right? But you can show, we've talked about this, you can show them that we have all of these things going on and go talk to Blake and go talk to this person. Now, other schools are a little more, I think, blatant and blunt about
Exactly.
Here's the opportunity.
Right.
But you want to be able to tell a good story. And you can tell a story to the family. We have all these partnerships. Look, you can even, not now, you can even talk to these guys and you can get your jersey hung on the Emden here, and you could do an endorsement. And you're interested in media? We can have you do a podcast with us and things like that. But I think that's what a lot of people are worried about, is we don't have a good enough story to tell to those families who are asking about it for those top recruits. We need a better story and around NIL. And there's a good one. It's not a great one right now, but we're getting there.
The bottom line is there's an endorsement from the University of Michigan to a collective, which means the University of Michigan is trusting somebody from the outside and working in cooperation, which I always thought was going to be a problem with a school like Michigan to begin with, to let somebody else inside their door and be a partner, where other schools, I look at Nebraska and Iowa, they're openly allowing everybody in, and the idea of alcohol sales and their own spirits and their own beer to be sold in the stadiums. That's where everybody from all different classes are participating in this.
And in related news, Michigan State is selling alcohol at games, but not through an NIL endeavor. MSU selling alcohol to entice their fans to show up for a potentially disappointing 5-7 season.
Which validates my little birdie that said it was State was the driving force, and you guessed correctly, the driving force between the legislation to get this passed. But I don't think we've heard anything from Michigan yet on the alcohol sales.
No, nothing yet, and I'm not sure anything is going to happen right away at the University of Michigan for the reasons that we talked about before. And we don't need alcohol.
I have my own jammed in my jeans. I'm good.
It goes back when alcohol was first allowed at stadiums in the Big Ten to begin with. I mean, that was just something you didn't do, but people were doing it because those universities needed the money. So what do? You try to keep people coming to the game and enjoying it by allowing alcohol sales.
I'm sure that's part of it. And you pointed out the revenue isn't quite as big as you think it might be. It looks like. But at Michigan Stadium, it would be pretty significant when you got 110,000 fans in there. So I think it's coming eventually. I think they'll try it. Maybe not in a night game, but I think they'll try it.
Put a bow on things. You mentioned that Michigan was having a cooperation with Learfield to use the Block M.
Yeah.
There's other schools that Learfield and brewery and distillery companies that are also taking part. Creative juices are flowing. It's not just Iowa and Nebraska that I mentioned a minute ago, but Louisville has partnered with Learfield to create a beer for the people in Louisville to go see games. Same thing with North Dakota State has partnered with Learfield and a brewery so they could launch some craft beers out. I think it's going to be kind of funny because you look at some of these names and what they're selling. Of course, North Dakota is going to be into craft brewery. In the South, it's probably going to be more about spirit, like a bourbon partnership as opposed to a beer partnership. But it is kind of funny that you can regionalize some of these schools and almost guess exactly what kind of product they're going to sell.
No, I love it. I'm glad you brought that up because there is one more point related to this, and it's a little more cynical. It's not that the football team and the athletic department said, hey, Champion Circle, you're the best. You should be our brand. There was a negotiation with Learfield. I believe what ultimately caused Michigan to endorse Champion Circle is that they worked out a deal with Learfield and money was exchanged to say, what will it take for us to get a piece of this? And cynically, I'm sorry, but the fact is money's driving all of this, okay?
If we haven't learned anything at all, Greg, it's the fact that money is driving every single thing. It's driving to the breakup of 100-year-old conferences.
Yeah. Well, it's going to affect the budgets of schools, of course, but you mentioned, we have Jim Harbaugh, and if we had to, we could go out and get another coach and pay him. We can do that. Can Oregon State do that? They have a pretty hot coach right now. They're paying him a lot of money. Are they going to be able to pay him? Are they going to be able to replace him if he leaves? This is a big question for a lot of the schools right now that are kind of on the outside looking in. We're almost forcing a second class, a second division or third division of teams right now, just based on their revenue and their ability to pay for staff.
There has always been a second division and a second level and a third division and a third level. It's just the teams are shifting about who's in it. Oregon State's moving into the lower level. I'm not sure who's going into the upper level. There just might be a fewer amount of teams that will be considered true Division I Power 5 football, which is now Power 4 football.
Obviously it's the money, but it's absolutely a fact. We always focus on the head coaching salary. We always focus on that. And maybe we talk, oh, wow, this guy's making $1 million. Man, the real money is through Ben Herbert's contract and all of the assistants. That's where you really bury, the other schools as far as your coaching budget. It's not hard. Yeah, Harbaugh makes a lot of money, but come on.
The arms race started with the head coach and then went to the coordinators. Somewhere in between that was actually the facilities, which is always an ongoing thing. And after that, it's your strength coach.
Yeah.
And then the rest of that just starts filtering down to the position coaches. Many of the position coaches, just even a decade or so ago, was like $125,000. Now you're well north of $200,000 for a position coach. And so there's an escalation there, but there are fewer and fewer of those jobs that are going to be available, and everybody else is making a much lower tier.
Absolutely, man.
And Greg, that brings us to halftime here on The Professor and the Pundit. So that means we're going to bring in Nick Hopwood, certified financial planner, founder, and president of Peak Wealth Management. Retire with confidence.
Nick, let's say I'm saving for a trip to the college football playoff, maybe for 2 games right now. Do I keep that in cash, or do I buy like a 6-month CD or something like that, knowing that we're several months away from this theoretical trip that I'm talking about?
It is theoretical, but let's start saving for it. Why not, right? I would probably just use the money market, in my opinion, keep life a little bit simple. I think the rates will be the same over the next 6 months. I don't see a huge difference either way.
Yep. Okay, thanks, man.
Steve, which year was it that we played Alabama down in Dallas?
2012, Nick.
And that was Denard's senior year, right?
Right.
So I think that we were going to play them maybe 1 year in advance, something like that. And I thought, this is a game I have to go to. And sure enough, what I did is when I have my online savings account, you can create different buckets. So I created a Dallas bucket, and I started contributing like $500 a month to that. And sure enough, when we got to game time, the flight and everything was covered.
Yeah, because I've had a quote-unquote Pasadena fund for a long time, and it's
overflowing.
It's overflowing. It is.
And Nick, if people want to know more, how can they get a hold of you?
You can schedule an appointment with us at peakwm.com or give us a call at 734-681-7575.
One more time with that phone number?
734-681-7575.
All right, Steve, so I got to talk about this. An article by a guy named Brady McCullough from the LA Times. So here it is, Steve. This is basically what he said. He researched the demise of the Pac-12, and we're still picking through the pieces of the rubble, right, of what happened here and what's going to happen. But I guess in October of last year, we know that ESPN offered the Pac-12 a deal, and apparently it was $30 million a school, right? And we know they didn't go for it.
Sort of similar to what the Big 12 has now.
Yeah, we know that the Pac-12 went back for more. But what this LA Times story said is that a Pac-12 president, they did not identify the school, quote, worked with a professor on his campus, unquote. Okay.
Wasn't you.
It wasn't Michigan. It wasn't me, who estimated the school's market value was $50 million a school. So the Pac-12, based on the professor's advice, asked for $50 million. ESPN said 2 things: no and goodbye. And that was it.
That was it.
But so Stanford, somebody like that, they went for, oh, this guy's really smart. He calculated our market value. Okay.
He must be the most respected professor in the Pac-12 when it comes to these matters. Because why else would you tie everything down to a single professor at a particular school to do it all for you?
Okay. I so want to get this guy's study and look at it and look at what he did. And I almost guarantee you, Steve, He understood what the game was, and it was about TV value, and they valued this asset according to some theoretical model in the market. What they didn't understand is the market. That this isn't a free market economy with an endless supply of bidders. It was very, very restricted because the Pac-12 had already stepped in, renegotiated their contract, and took the airtime. There's limited airtime. There's limited eyeballs, limited time. I'm sure they overvalued, or either didn't consider that properly or just missed it. But the fact that the presidents all looked, oh, look at this smart guy and this wonderful study he put together. God, I would love to see it. And apparently they all said, yeah, that makes sense. Now, do you need someone to help you with what's a fair rate? How are we not getting ripped off? Everybody should do that, right? And maybe this is one piece of data to look at. But I wondered how the Big Ten came up with. They must have hired a consultant to go, hey, this is probably what the market will bear for this. This is how the networks think.
I would think you'd have a team of people.
Yes, and is it any wonder that Tony Petitti, his background is completely in TV. He's made these deals, right, for MLB and all these other people. You have to have that information. And the fact that this implies a few things, that they were flailing a little bit to understand what their market value was. Obviously, they were concerned. It is the thing. But the fact that they leaned on, I have this little report here, let's have a look. And that's kind of how they built their stance back to ESPN. Oh my God, it cracks me up, Steve. And it does exemplify something that I see as someone who came from the private sector, who's now in academics, and I catch myself doing this even, right? Well, it says this here. That doesn't mean that it's practical, meaningful, or tangible, or something that will actually work in practice, right? I had this example when Danielle Davison came in. She works with U of M compliance in the athletic department. She's wonderful, and she's really our one person dedicated to NIL at Michigan right now that I'm aware of, okay? And I hope that changes. But there's a state law on the books that agents must be registered in the state of Michigan, and I've mentioned this before. And she said, yeah, well, there's really no way to control these agents. And I'm like, well, Danielle, the state law states that they must be registered in the state of Michigan and they must be licensed. And she's like, oh, yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Where do you go do that, Greg? I'm like, I don't know what the law says. Yeah, there is no real infrastructure in the state of Michigan to identify, license, and register and report on. All or any of those things seem to be out of place. So in practicality, they probably just borrowed that language from another law. But it doesn't matter in this case,
well,
right?
It was a giant consulting mistake. It would be like asking me to consult on a media deal. It seems like they didn't go very far into finding people to do that.
Yeah. Steve, it's like if we were hanging out and having beers and like, hey, I got a buddy who's he knows something about insurance. You know what I mean? It's like are the presidents just hanging out and having beers and spitballing about what to do? Like, oh, I've got this professor who's really smart. Maybe we should ask him. Oh, okay, yeah, do that. Do that, Jim.
And you represent the Pac-12. and so one of the more interesting things that I found in the article was talking about the UCLA travel schedule. At about $10 to $12 million, they would obviously have to travel a lot more than, say, one of our original Midwestern Big Ten schools. But they figured that travel would be $10 to $12 million a year. And I go back to my old math. Hey, I got some numbers. It's sort of the same thing. But doing the simple math about how much the Big Ten is making now, and if you're offering a half share and the rest of the Big Ten schools wouldn't be losing a dollar by inviting Washington and Oregon, the Big Ten didn't invite Oregon and Washington over $4 million a year. It would have gone down from $65 million to $61 million. So it's $4 million a year. And yet the travel schedule for UCLA, a Western-based school, was $10 to $12 million a year. We know that the Big Ten institutions would be as much as that, but it almost just seems to be you should have probably just invited them anyway. Or
shouldn't have invited Oregon, Washington the second time around.
Well, and I love how that came about, because this is another piece of the wreckage that we're examining, is that we learned that UCLA went back to the Pac-12 because they were getting pressure from the governor.
Sure they were.
And it's a state school, right? So there's ramifications to the others. And they eventually ended up paying back into the school, the state school system.
Once again, the Pac-12 overestimated the thoughts and feelings of moving to the Big Ten Conference.
Right. And so, but UCLA went back and go, okay, we'll come back. we'll take this to our regents, but here's what we need. We need a guarantee from the Pac-12 to make us whole on this. And what they said was, okay, the Big Ten is giving us this. Here's the added travel costs to accommodate the Big Ten schedules for our teams. That will be removed. So if you come at this number, we'll come back. But you have to guarantee it. No matter what the TV contract is, right? We get this. And they said we can't do that, or we won't do that.
Two things would have to happen. One, even less money at Oregon State and Washington State.
Absolutely.
And Cal and Stafford would have to fund a $52 million deal, or George Klavikoff, the Pac-12 commissioner, has to come up with a $50 million deal. The best he could get 6 months ago was a $30 million a year deal. That wasn't enough, and they probably was still interested in equal revenue sharing. The bottom line to me on all of this is that years ago, beginning of a series of mismanagement steps that led to the demise of the Big 12, the first thing was that if the Pac-12 could have gotten Oklahoma and Texas to join the Pac-12 would be alive and well going into today. Now, maybe some of the reasons they didn't want Oklahoma and Texas to come into the Pac-12 because they thought the regional ties was a little bit of a stretch.
Whoops.
They were concerned about how it would look to the public that we raided another conference, that we didn't have to go there. We're strong enough as it is. And this all just goes back to my feelings about the Big Ten. These are common people. Your next door neighbor says, I wish we didn't have to go there and take somebody. Well, would you rather wish your conference to be dead?
They didn't realize the stakes were this high.
No.
Yeah.
And neither did any of us until after it happened.
Yeah.
But you have to realize now that when it comes to taking schools, the Big Ten was in the forefront of doing so, helped ensure their survival years down the road, because usually it's just that mentality, do it to them before they do it to us. I don't feel bad about how things came out because the Big Ten is still here. It may not be the way I like it, but at least it's still here.
Yeah, it's still here. And even with all the talk and the study and the classes, I mean, that the Pac-12 would be in rubble as I start the fall semester, and I'm gearing up for that, Steve. I had to update my syllabus with my narrative about how did we get here? But the here keeps changing because it's absolutely the lead. It's absolutely the lead. I would be surprised if it stops because the Pac-4, they're still in flux right now. There's still a notion, I heard, that they're still owed or still have rights to the NCAA basketball tournament money for the conference, as it were, before. In other words, for the teams that left, no, that's still conference revenue that we have rights to. And I don't know if that'll hold up, Steve, and how much of a factor that is, but it's millions of dollars a team.
I think the big thing is that what exists of the Pac-12, which is now really the Pac-4, has 2 years remaining in a temporary situation where they consider it a Power 5 conference. They got 2 years to figure it out to get a certain minimum into their fold to remain a conference. You can't be a two-team conference and call yourself a conference.
The NCAA is so dead.
So
they're so dead.
Everything is in flux, but what's coming up is the start of the college football season in the Big Ten, which clearly seems to me a battle between three teams in the same division. Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State. Been previewing, of course, all these teams. Michigan is, absolutely loaded up at quarterback with J.J. McCarthy, while Ohio State and Penn State are turning to new people. The running back situation is fairly even in comparison to the quarterback situation, but Michigan is probably edging out there over Ohio State and Penn State. And receivers, Ohio State's got a great group of receivers. Michigan not on that same level, and it's a little bit further disparity than the running back groups are. And Penn State's rebuilding at receiver too. Finally, the offensive line. Michigan's got the most depth on an offensive line I think they've ever had. And maybe you have to go back to the 70s or 80s, but they literally have a two deep that could start with most other teams in college football.
So let's talk about that because it's back-to-back Joe Moore winning lines. Right. But everyone's saying this line, without Olu, without the player of the year, is better.
They have more depth.
Yeah. We do cycle in a lot of players, right?
Well, linemen get hurt.
Yeah,
so there's a lot of them. A lot of them miss starts.
So do quarterbacks. Quarterbacks, Steve.
So they've got 10 guys who might be playing in the NFL a year from now.
That's insane.
They've got a solid two deep.
We seem to be doing that, like either through the transfer portal or through development of players. Is like you wake up and we got 2 Big Ten championships, and suddenly we're one of the best player development teams in the country. Like, wow.
That is happening. And of course, when you're winning, you can easily recruit people through the transfer portal.
Yeah.
It's a reason why Alabama can win as much as they've had. Same reason for Ohio State to win as much as they have in the last 2 decades. Michigan is in that particular situation. Whether it's short-lived or long-term remains to be seen.
Yeah. Like one of your things that I kind of hang on, Steve, is you like to see an example of growth is when an incumbent player, a starter, is overtaken by someone else on the roster in that position. Like
Exactly.
that's a great sign to you, right?
It is.
Here's a weird sign. Not only Michigan players in the NFL, how about people who transferred away from Michigan and are in the NFL? Like Zach Charbonnet, right? Couldn't make it on our depth chart. Good enough, and I know there were different reasons for him, but left and made the NFL on someone else's team. Like, we can shed talent. We can shed Eric All. I don't know if Cade McNamara is going to make the NFL, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's in a lot of camps. But we can afford to. They couldn't crack our lineup. I mean, that's another sign, right? Of these guys who we shed off, who just do great.
The SEC is starting 3 quarterbacks who were former Big Ten quarterbacks.
I saw
in the
Peyton
Big
Thorne.
Ten.
Peyton Thorne got the starting gig at Auburn. Yeah.
Joe Milton is
right.
starting at
Of course,
Tennessee.
Michigan, yeah.
Okay, and Graham Mertz
Oh, I saw that.
is starting at the University of Florida. So 3 quarterbacks out of the Big Ten. If you want to be strong and call them failures, fine. But they have left the Big Ten for the greener pastures of being a starting quarterback in the SEC. Think about that for a moment.
Graham Mertz.
And of course, Will Levis left Penn State to be a starter at Kentucky for a couple of years.
I feel bad saying this, but is there one person who caused the demise of an entire program more than Graham Mertz in recent history, as far as how much they bet on this guy to be the guy? Right? Am I right?
That was their missing link.
Yeah.
That was their missing link. They had the offensive line. They had the running game. They had one of the top 5 defenses in America. Wisconsin ran into Ohio State. But how do we beat Ohio State? How do we become that, next team? Wisconsin looked at a 5-star quarterback named Graham Mertz, the best recruited player ever to come to Wisconsin. They had to change a little bit of their identity, okay, from all the power running to add that added dimension of a quarterback who could pass down the field. And it didn't work out for Wisconsin in a lot of different ways. Their offensive line wasn't the same. The quarterback didn't live up to the pressure, whatever. And Wisconsin had a whole ton of issues, and that snowball ran downhill and turned to an avalanche that eventually led to the firing of Paul Chryst.
So I mentioned my visit to Schembecker Hall, and I got to see the team meeting, and there was some film. And the team on the other end of the film that they were demonstrating was the Minnesota defense in this case. And some of the highlights from the Minnesota defense were on the backs of errant passes by Graham Mertz.
Right.
I was just shaking my head looking at this guy. Like, wow.
Well, it didn't work out for Graham Mertz, and it cost Paul Chryst his job.
Yeah.
It can turn on a single player.
It's harsh, man. It's harsh. Well, I'm curious to see what I'm curious to see how Milton does, right? That seemed to be after the Minnesota game. Speaking of Minnesota, the mood was high, right? The mood in we got our quarterback.
2020.
He was accurate, brought the jug home, and then it all kind of went down from there.
Lost to Michigan State the very next week.
Right. But then we see he had a pretty good end of the season at Tennessee, so that should be interesting. Very interested to see. I thought Peyton Thorne was a serviceable quarterback, not bad. Had pretty decent receivers. Mertz was a train wreck. So we'll see. All these guys, we'll see.
They're now starting in the SEC.
And the SEC of all
Take
places.
that, SEC.
I will.
You're taking our leftovers at quarterback and you're starting them.
All right, that means we're in overtime right now. So after the recording, the news came out that the University of Michigan Athletic Department has decided to self-impose its sanctions on Jim Harbaugh of the first 3 games of Michigan's football season. Now, a few important takeaways to understand. It's the first 3 games of the season against East Carolina, UNLV, and Bowling Green. Not exactly difficult games to be concerned about. The original discussion included the conference opener against Rutgers. The big thing to take away from this, though, is this is a self-imposed sanction, which means the NCAA Committee on Infractions didn't necessarily sign off on this. They'll have the next word on it. That doesn't mean it's finished business either. There's no word on any further suspension or any admission of a Level 1 violation of lying or misleading or hampering investigators. I'll have more to say about it on the Michigan Insider with Sam Webb and Ira Weintraub on Sports Talk 1050 WTKA live Wednesday the 23rd after 9 a.m. and on the Michigan Insider podcast. Thank you again for joining us here on The Professor and the Pundit. A reminder to please follow, rate, and share with your friends. And a special thanks to Nick Hopwood, our title sponsor for Season 2. If you need a certified financial planner or think you could do better with one, go to peakwm.com. Remember, Michigan football, back-to-back Big Ten championships. Don't ever forget that. We'll talk to you next week, Greg. Go Blue.
Go Blue.